Croeso bawb i'r...
Welcome to this plenary session. Before we begin, I want to set out a few points. A plenary meeting held by video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act 2006. Some of the provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary meeting, and these are noted on your agenda. I would remind members that standing orders relating to order in plenary meetings apply to this meeting. The first item is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Gareth Bennett.
Diolch, Llywydd. What evaluation has the First Minister made of the Welsh Government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
So throughout this unprecedented crisis, the Welsh Government has acted to save lives and livelihoods. We continue to monitor and review the actions we take to keep Wales safe, in line with the latest clinical and scientific advice.
Thanks for that response. We have had a lower vaccination rate than the other parts of the UK so far. The rate in England is about 3.5% of the population, while in Wales it has been 2.7%. Although you have tried to play down this difference, it does amount to an extra 25,000 people who could have been vaccinated in Wales if you and your Health Minister had been on the ball. Given that your Health Minister has not even set foot in an NHS hospital in recent months because he is worried that he will be getting in the way, does he now need to resign so that he isn't getting in the way of vaccinating more people? And do we now need to adopt a UK-led approach to vaccinations?
No.
Andrew R.T. Davies.
First Minister, the vaccination programme is a huge programme for the government and the people of Wales to embark on, and it's important people maintain confidence in its delivery in every part of Wales. What consideration have you given to creating the position within the government of a vaccination minister to help drive this logistical exercise across Wales to iron out any of the difficulties that might occur? Because we do know that the NHS as a whole is under enormous pressure, and the current health minister has to spend a considerable amount of time dealing with those issues, rightly so, because obviously elective surgery has been postponed in many areas, and those pressures will be unrelenting in the coming weeks. So have you given any consideration to drawing on some of the talent on your backbenchers, such as Carwyn Jones or Alan Davies, who could fulfil such a position of a vaccination minister?
So I thank the member for both his recognition of the scale of the effort that is needed and is being made to roll out a vaccination programme on the size and scale that is necessary here in Wales, and of his recognition of the enormous pressure that the health service is currently operating under while it rolls out the vaccination programme. My view is that vaccination is intimately connected with everything else that the health service seeks to do. That you cannot make decisions in one part of the NHS's responsibilities severed off from everything else. Much better, I believe, to allow the health minister, who is intimately acquainted with everything that has happened in the last 10 months, with the coronavirus effort of the health service, including vaccination, to be in charge of that effort. I think that works better than trying to hand over just part of what the NHS has to do to one other person, inevitably creating new barriers and borderlines and so on. Our health minister has worked absolutely tirelessly over the last 10 months. He is in the best position to make sure that everything we need to do in vaccination is taken forward in line with a plan that was published yesterday.
Alan Davies.
I'm grateful to you, Presiding Officer. I'm glad the First Minister gave such short shrift to the questioner on this matter. This was, of course, somebody who wanted to invite Donald Trump to open his ill-fated office in Pontypridd, and also has got everything wrong at every point over the last 9 months. What is important now in terms of reviewing how we go forward is to ensure that we continue to support people through this pandemic. The First Minister will be aware that the Conservatives are promoting the idea that there's £1 billion sitting either underneath his sofa or in his back pocket somewhere. Will the First Minister confirm that the Welsh Government is using all its funds, all its resources to support the people of Wales and businesses across the whole country as we move forward through this terrible pandemic?
Well, shall we thanks to Alan Davis for both of those questions. You've had a constituent sent me the quotes from the person who asked the question in which he invited the President of the United States to open his office in Pontypridd, an office, as you remember, that never did open, many thousands of pounds of public money having been wasted in the process. The same constituent also reminded me that Mr. Bennett had placed an amendment in front of the Senedd in December saying that he believed that the new level of restrictions that were being introduced in Wales were disproportionate. Well, he'll have seen now that the rest of the United Kingdom has followed suit. It was not disproportionate, it was simply necessary. He was wrong on that, as he's wrong on what he has asked me today. And on this complete canard about £1 billion just sitting in the Welsh Government, shall we? In November, we were 2/3 of the way through the financial year, and we had spent 2/3 of our budget. The end of December, we were 3/4 of the way through the financial year, and we'd spent 3/4 of our budget. We spent 80% of the budget now in January. Can you imagine anything more irresponsible than urging the Welsh Government to entirely spend out of our budget with a quarter of the financial year still to go, and a very demanding and challenging quarter as well? I thought the points that were made by Conservative MPs were not simply misguided, Llywyd, they were foolish and they were designed to misinform. And I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to put that record straight this afternoon.
Cwestiwn 2, Jenny Rathbone.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, what plans does the Welsh Government have to secure investment in electric vehicle battery production in Wales?
Thanks, the member, for that question. So it plans to use the research, development and manufacturing strength of the sector in Wales, have already secured 2 sites at the top of the UK shortlist for gigafactory production of electric vehicle batteries, and 4 different research and commercialisation projects as part of the £318 million Faraday Battery Challenge.
Thank you very much for that information. That's very encouraging. This may seem a slightly odd question in the middle of this pandemic, but we do know that we have to stay focused on a green recovery and to meet our climate and air pollution targets as well. So we know that all new vehicles sold in the UK will need to be powered by renewable technology by 2030, and therefore existing vehicle production facilities are using fossil fuels are a depleting asset unless they are converting to electric or hydrogen. And I'm very pleased to hear from Hitachi that they are trialling the use of batteries on trains to run on main lines that the UK government has failed to electrify. And that obviously includes the main line that runs west from Cardiff Central. So this could be highly relevant to avoiding the belching diesel fumes on trains heading west in the future. But trains are a niche product compared to cars. And I just wondered what can be done to really work with existing UK vehicle manufacturers to see that Wales has a unique offer in terms of our engineering and compound semiconductor expertise in which to site electric battery vehicle production at scale.
Well, so I thank Jenny Rathbone for that very important question. She's absolutely right to point out that while coronavirus preoccupies us as an immediate public health crisis, the crisis of climate change has not gone away and needs to still be at the forefront of our thoughts. The member will be pleased to know that in the Automotive Transformation Fund, which I didn't refer to in my original answer, Wales has succeeded in getting 3 projects funded in the first round of that fund. All 3 of them are in that south-east corner of Wales, in Newport and in Caldicot, where we have that cluster of expertise in semiconductors. And I think that is a recognition of the fact that we have that source of expertise that has developed here in Wales, and which will be of advantage to the whole of the UK. And indeed, there are UK manufacturers who are already contributing to the effort that Jenny Rathbone mentioned. Hydro Aluminium, for example, a company that is preparing components for the all-electric London taxi fleet. And that's just one example. There are other firms in Wales already supplying components in this very important area. And as for trains, I was very grateful to have a chance to meet just before Christmas the Senior Vice President of Hitachi, who was visiting the United Kingdom, and to explore with him the interest that Hitachi has in the work that we are doing here in Wales, in the railway sector, planning for the future, making sure that we play our part in the great effort that will be needed, as Jenny Rathbone said, Llywydd, to make sure that our transport and our public transport in the future meets the challenge that climate change poses to us all.
Janet Finch-Saunders.
Can't unmute. Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, you will be aware, I hope, that British Volt signed a memorandum of understanding with you and your government in a bid to build the UK's first large-scale electric vehicle battery factory here in Wales. Now, despite the Vale of Glamorgan's site being the initial favourite, and the Minister for Economy, Transport and North Wales informing us in October that he was in regular calls with British Volt, our nation has lost out in the race to be a global hub for the electrified vehicle industry. British Volt will be sadly taking its £2.6 billion investment, 3,000 highly skilled jobs, and up to 5,000 more in the wider supply chain to Northumberland. Why did you, as the First Minister, allow this battery to run flat on British Volt in Wales? And why did you not offer any financial incentives whatsoever to supercharge such an important industry and development for Wales? Diolch.
Well, I'm afraid the member read out her question, but was not very well informed about it. We continue to be in discussions with British Volt. The move to Blythe is their first factory. As I said in my answer to Jenny Rathbone, Wales has two sites, the Brotathan site and the Baglan site, in the top 5 of the United Kingdom government's shortlist for gigafactory production of electric batteries. We continue to be in discussion with British Volt. They have ambitions beyond Blythe, and Wales is very much on their list for the next phase of their development. I am very keen that we continue to pursue those possibilities, and certainly not to run down the efforts that the company made with the Welsh Government to bring jobs and activity to Wales.
Questions now from the party leaders. Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, Mohammed Hassan was a fit and healthy 24-year-old. On Friday evening, he was arrested at a property in Cardiff where neighbours reportedly spoke of a significant commotion. Having been taken into custody at Cardiff Bay Police Station, Mr. Hassan was released without charge on Saturday. Later that evening, he tragically died. Witnesses were reportedly shocked by Mr. Hassan's condition following his release, saying that his tracksuit was covered in blood and he had severe injuries and bruising. There can be no doubt that this is a deeply harrowing case, and every effort should be made to seek the truth of what happened. Why was Mohammed Hassan arrested? What happened during his arrest? Did he have legal representation? Was there any aftercare? Why did this young man die? Whilst we should not prejudge the outcome of any inquiry, will you commit, First Minister, to doing everything within your power to help the family find those answers? And do you support their call for an independent investigation of this case?
Well, I thank Leader Plaid Cymru for that question. I've read the reports to which he referred, they are deeply concerning, of course. And our thoughts must be with the family of a young man who was, as Adam Price said, a fit and healthy individual whose death in the circumstances that the Leader of Plaid Cymru described must be properly investigated. Now, I understand that the police have already referred, as they would have to, this matter to the Independent Police Investigation Service. The first step in any inquiry will have to be to allow them to carry out their work. I absolutely expect that to be done rigorously and with full and visible independence. I'm glad that the family have secured legal assistance to them in order to pursue their very understandable concerns. And if there are things the Welsh Government can do, then I will make sure that we attend properly to those without, as the member said, prejudging in any way the outcome of the independent investigations that now need to follow.
In 1990, following the most high-profile murder case in the history of South Wales Police, 3 black men were wrongly convicted of the murder of Lynette White, and 11 years later, 12 police officers were acquitted on a technicality in the largest police corruption case in history. In the case known as the Buttown 3, 5 police officers were disciplined 11 years ago following an incident in Cardiff when 2 black students who had been attacked by skinheads were themselves arrested and charged with violent disorder. In 2019, the death of 13-year-old Christopher Capessa, who drowned in the River Cynon, was described as an accident within 24 hours by South Wales Police. Only after a persistent campaign did the Crown Prosecution Service admit there was sufficient evidence for a manslaughter prosecution. Christopher's mother, Alina, described the force as institutionally racist. Given the history and their daily experience, do you understand, First Minister, why so many people of colour would have some sympathy with that statement?
Well, Llywydd, let me say for the record, as I know the member himself would, Black Lives Matter in absolutely every aspect of public services and public life here in Wales. And that obligation lies with our police services as much as with any other part of Welsh life. I have been, though, to make the record a fair one, I have myself attended with senior members of the South Wales Police at mosques and other gatherings of black communities here in Wales at points when those communities felt very badly under threat because, for example, of the Christchurch attacks in New Zealand 18 months or so ago. That night, South Wales Police mobilised across the whole of their area, making sure that mosque communities felt protected, that they knew there was a visible presence of the South Wales Police there. And I attended myself with the Chief Constable at a number of meetings with leaders of those communities, making sure that they knew that their police service was there to look after and to protect them. So I think we have to look at the record in the round, where disturbing matters happen. And I was a member of the South Wales Police Authority during those awful years around 1990, when there was a failure to grasp the significance of what had gone on and the depths to which cover-ups had been engaged in. But I think while we take those things seriously, absolutely must do, there is a wider record and a great deal of commitment from very senior people in our police services here in all parts of Wales to make sure that the right things are done, and we need to support them in that, even while we make sure that those individual examples of the sort that Leader Plaid Cymru began his questions with today, while those get the proper independent and open attention they need to reassure those people who are most directly touched by them.
First Minister, you're right, obviously, to point to those positive steps which should be supported and encouraged. But would you accept that more can and needs to be done? I'll give you one example. just 2.6% of South Wales police officers are BAME compared to 6.7% of the population within the force area. Statistics produced by the Wales Governance Centre shows that our prison population here in Wales is even more racially disproportional than that in the United States. You're 5.5 times more likely to go to prison if you're black than if you're white in the US. In Wales, the figure is 6.5. And in June last year, when we were discussing the case of George Floyd and the repercussions of that, I asked you to commit to setting up a wide-ranging inquiry into the roots and remedies of structural racism and racial disadvantage here in Wales. You said then you would consider that proposal. Have you made a decision?
Well, I definitely agree that more could and should be done. Lots of that will be represented in the Race Equality Action Plan, which the Welsh Government will publish in just a few weeks' time. That Race Equality Action Plan has been informed by the report into the structural causes of racism here in Wales, which has already been commissioned and has already reported. So that report was chaired and produced by Professor Emmanuel Ogbono, a distinguished academic and member of the Black community here in Wales. It makes for sobering reading, as the member I'm sure would agree. And no more is it, there's no place where it is more shocking than in the figures to which Adam Price has referred this afternoon to the criminal justice system. The level of discrimination faced by Black people in the wider criminal justice system absolutely has to be grasped and remedied. It's one of the reasons why taking forward the proposals of the Thomas Commission is so important, because it would give us opportunities we don't have now to be able directly to deal with some of the points that the member has quite rightly raised this afternoon. But his final question about a report into structural racism here in Wales, that report has been commissioned and that report is available, and it has formed the basis of the Race Equality Action Plan. I'm very grateful indeed to Professor Ogbono for his continued engagement in the production of that plan, which will use all the levers available to us here through our devolved powers to address the pernicious impacts to which the leader of Blaid Cymru has referred in his questions this afternoon.
Rwy'n iddo Ceidwadwyr Paul Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, the Welsh Government's vaccine strategy has confirmed that 280,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine and 47,000 of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have now been received here in Wales, and yet we know that only around 91,000 doses have been administered, and we know as of yesterday 2.7% of the population of Wales has been vaccinated compared to 3% in Scotland and 3.5% in England. Can you explain to the people of Wales why the rollout of the vaccine has fallen behind other UK nations to date? And can you tell us why you believe this is not a sprint, given that this is a race to actually beat the virus?
Well, the leader of the opposition is right that the race is against the virus, not against any other part of the United Kingdom. That race will be run not over a week, but over months and months ahead. We will still be vaccinating people here in Wales well into the final months of this calendar year. And what I was trying to explain to people is that that will have to be a sustained effort, not something that is just over and done with in a few days or a week. We are going to have to gear up to make sure that we are flat out, right across the system, to vaccinate the maximum number of people as quickly and as safely as possible. Let me deal with the first point that the Leader of the Opposition made, Chloe, to make sure people understand the position here. We are using every bit of the Oxford vaccine that we get as soon as we get it. 22,000 doses last week. We expect 25,000 doses this week, 80,000 and maybe a bit more than that next week, and then a rising, and let's hope rapidly rising, volume of supply. With the Pfizer vaccine, we received the majority of those 2,800 doses just around Christmas. They have to last us until the end of the first week of February. They're not given to us to use in a few days. That is the supply Wales has for the whole of January and the first week of February as well. And that's why it would never have been a sensible proposition to have suggested that we should have used the whole of that supply in the first few days. That supply has to be evened out over the weeks for which it is available, so that we have vaccinators with work to do in every week, able to make the very most of that supply. And the member will remember that on the 31st of December, the advice to the JCVI changed. At that point, we thought we would have to halve that supply because we needed to be able to deliver 2 doses of it to everybody within the time that we had that vaccine to use. On the 31st of December, that advice was changed, and I think it was the right thing to do, which will save, we think, 10,000 people here in Wales from contracting coronavirus to be able to use a first dose of that vaccine for people more rapidly. But the reason why it hasn't all been used in the first few days is because it's got to last us for 6 weeks.
Well, First Minister, the Health Minister was absolutely right to say that it was a race, and that's why it's crucial that when doses are received, that they are administered as quickly as possible to those in priority groups across Wales. And it's clear that the Welsh Government must urgently accelerate the rollout of the vaccine in Wales if we have any chance of seriously suppressing this virus in our community. It's also clear that the Welsh Government must look at using all available medical practitioners to help administer the vaccines, including retired clinicians and more community pharmacists. However, in an open letter, retired consultant surgeon Professor John Fairclough has made it clear that the failure to ease the method by which retired clinicians can be recruited will reduce the capacity of the NHS to achieve its vaccination rollout. Indeed, in my own health board area, a retired clinician made it clear to me, and I quote, "Having read a request for volunteers from our local health board, here will die, in the local newspaper, I applied a few weeks ago, but I've heard nothing. It appears I'm not the only one who's experienced this. It pains me to see my GP colleagues struggling with their work and having to take on the additional responsibility of administering the vaccine," unquote. Now, surely the Welsh Government should be doing everything possible to recruit retired clinicians to help deliver the vaccine across the country. Therefore, First Minister, can you tell us what steps the Welsh Government is taking to recruit clinicians to administer the vaccine? Can you confirm the number of community pharmacists the Welsh Government is planning to use to help roll out the vaccine? And can you also tell us what discussions have been had with health boards across Wales about utilising retired clinicians as an additional workforce in administering the vaccine in Wales, and whether there are any barriers in place preventing retired clinicians from helping deliver the vaccine?
Well, sorry, I agree with the rate between the injection and the infection. And that is the race that I am focused on, and the Health Minister is focused on making sure that we maximise our capacity to use whatever supply of vaccine comes our way as a result of the UK Government's procurement of it. And let me be clear, Llywyd, I'm grateful for the opportunities that there have been to discuss this with the UK Government. I discussed it with the other First Ministers and with Michael Gove on Wednesday of last week. I expect to have another discussion tomorrow. The Health Ministers met on Thursday of last week, and I'm quite confident that everything that can be done is being done by all 4 nations to get supplies of the vaccine and to get it to where they are needed and to use it as fast as possible. And that's the race that we are involved in here in Wales. Of course, we want to use as many qualified contractors to help us in that effort. And I'm hugely grateful to the enormous response that we have had from GP practices, the length and breadth of Wales. I think every single GP practice in the Hywel Dda area has signed up to deliver the vaccine. And we will be deploying community pharmacists as well. The first community pharmacy to deliver the vaccine will be by the end of this week, and that will be in North Wales. There are, as I'm sure Paul Davies understands, some practical things that have got to be sorted out. And you've got to have a bit of a chance to make sure that everything is being done in the best and safest way. And you've got to give it a bit of a chance to allow that to be tested. We will test that with community pharmacy in North Wales before the end of this week. And then we will want to use community pharmacists in all parts of Wales. They were very much part of our effort to deliver flu vaccine over the autumn. 1,100,000 people received flu vaccination in Wales over the autumn period. And that just demonstrates the capacity of the system here in Wales to deliver vaccination on a mass scale using all the different levers available to us. We want people who are retired to come back to help us with that effort. That is how the people that the Leader of the Opposition referred to knew about that. They'd had an invitation, they'd had a request to come back. Now, we still have to make sure that returning staff are properly equipped for the job we're asking them to do. Even if you're an experienced vaccinator, you've never used these vaccines. You've got to be trained in using these particular vaccines. You need to know the potential ab reactions that there may be to it. And that does have to be in place in order for people to be able to operate successfully, effectively, and safely. I want those barriers to be the minimum possible, but they're still got to be there to safeguard the person who is carrying out the job and to give confidence to the people who are being vaccinated.
Now, First Minister, the Welsh Government's COVID-19 vaccination strategy also confirms that the number of max vaccination centres across Wales will be increasing to 35 over the coming weeks, with at least one in each county. Given that the Welsh Government started with 7 centres 5 weeks ago, there's at least some progress on this front. However, it is absolutely critical, which I'm sure the First Minister will agree with me, that all parts of Wales have a vaccination centre in their own locality. In my own constituency, which is home to a large elderly population, many people continue to be frustrated at the lack of a vaccination centre in Pembrokeshire, and yet we're still no closer to seeing one set up. Therefore, can you provide the people of Wales with a timetable of when these new mass vaccination centres will be established along with their location, so that we can actually track and monitor their development? And can you also tell us what criteria has been used to decide on the location of each of these centres, so that the people of Wales can understand the rationale behind the Welsh Government's decision making on this particular issue?
Thank Paul Davis for that, Llywyd. He's right, we started with 7 max vaccination centres. We had 14 before Christmas, we have 22 today, we'll have 35 by the end of the month, and I'm confident that there will be one, as there should be, in Pembrokeshire, because we want one in every county in Wales. The criteria that have been used to identify those centres are a combination of availability, accessibility, and speed. We have to use locations that are quickly available to us. We need them in places where people can get to, where people will be, people will be driving to them. They could be able to park. They've got to be all of those sort of things, and they need to be the places that can be most speedily be brought into use. So those are amongst the criteria that have been identified in finding the vaccination centres. And I should say, because I know the member will be interested in this, that we've got 70 army staff now working with the Welsh Government on exactly those logistical issues. I came into work here in Caday's Park this morning at 8 o'clock, and the first 4 people who went in front of me were people wearing army fatigues. And we are very grateful indeed for the help that we are getting from the armed forces, both the 14 army vaccinators who are helping us directly with vaccinators, but the 70 other army staff who are helping us with the planning and the provision of the centres that we need and the facilities that go alongside them in every part of Wales.
Question 3, David Rowlands.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the difference between the figures provided by the Welsh Government and those provided in Public Health England's notification of infectious diseases weekly report in relation to COVID-19?
So with the notification of infectious diseases weekly reports published by Public Health England show only the numbers of suspected cases of coronavirus 19 as reported by clinicians. Public Health Wales publishes the total number of cases of COVID-19 as confirmed by laboratory tests.
Well, I thank the First Minister for that answer. However, First Minister, will you give us definitive figures to illustrate that this is a health crisis caused by infectious disease like no other? In 2018, there were 32,000 deaths from typhoid fever. In 2019, 17,000 died from mumps. And again, in 2018, cumulative deaths from communicable diseases amounted to 91,000. Why is it that we had no lockdowns in these years, yet 99.9% of the population survived? And can you tell us why our health service is overwhelmed by an extra 50 people in intensive care? They were the figures given to us by Vaughan Gethin last week, especially given that A&E admissions are down by 30%. Isn't it not true that every year during the winter months for the last 2 decades, the health service has been in a crisis at this time?
Did you hear that properly, First Minister? I think we were struggling with the sound from you, David Rowlands. And if you're to speak later on this afternoon, if you can just speak to the IT people regarding the quality of your sound. But First Minister, did you get enough of the question to be able to answer?
I believe I did, Llywydd, although, as you said, it was a bit of a struggle to hear the beginning part. I've heard a member previously somehow suggest that we're making a fuss about nothing when it comes to coronavirus, that there have been other diseases and other times that we've managed to survive. I honestly fail to understand what he is unable to grasp about this killer disease that has caused the deaths of thousands of people here now in Wales, and where we are seeing at this point in this wave of the virus even more people dying week by week. It does absolutely nobody any favours at all to act as though this were not the public health crisis that it is. Over a third of beds in Welsh hospitals today are occupied by people who are so ill with coronavirus that they need the care of a hospital setting. And we have almost as many people in critical care today because of coronavirus as at any point in the progress of this disease. Where David Rowlands is right is to say is that the health service is trying to go on doing all the other things that we need it to do. So there are as many people in critical care beds for other reasons as there are for coronavirus. But in order for the health service to be able to get back to dealing in the way we would all like it to see with all the other health needs that there are here in Wales, every one of us has to do everything we can to bear down on the current upswing in the virus here in Wales. And talking about coronavirus as though it were not the serious threat it is, simply undermines rather than supports the great national effort that others are making.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Llywydd. First Minister, figures are important. It is important that members of the public and members of this Senedd and members of the government have the opportunity to scrutinise the pace of the progress of the disease and also, of course, the pace of the rollout of the vaccination here in Wales in terms of the programme. Many people in North Wales have been in touch with me in recent weeks because, of course, it does seem as though North Wales is lagging behind somewhat in terms of the pace of progress with the rollout of the programme, albeit that the gap between North Wales and other parts of the country is beginning to close, which I'm pleased to have noted. Do you accept that we do need to have further data published on a more regular basis, and that on a daily basis we should be publishing by Health Board the number of vaccination doses which have been delivered, the proportion of those delivered to each of the priority groups, and indeed information on missed appointments, which I've been getting reports of at some of the vaccination centres, which of course is depriving other people who do need to get their vaccinations quickly in order to protect them against this dreadful disease?
Well, Llywyd, I hope it helps if I just give a very brief set of examples of the data that is published all the time in Wales. Testing figures published daily, vaccine figures published daily, TTP figures published weekly, PPE figures published weekly, care home figures published fortnightly, NHS activity published fortnightly. I could go on. There is a very long list indeed of data that the Welsh Government publishes all the time. And that is because I agree with the basic point the member makes, which is of the importance of keeping people as informed as we can of the progress that the NHS is making. And in that spirit, I'm sure the member will welcome the fact that in the figures that I have seen for today, the number of vaccinations carried out in the Betty Cadwaladr University Health Board area is now the highest of any part of Wales. So over 16,000 vaccinations now completed in North Wales. There's no other part of Wales that has broken through the 16,000 barrier as yet. Now, over the weeks, I'm absolutely certain that there will be some days when other health boards do slightly more than North Wales, and there'll be days when North Wales is back at the top of the list again. But no part of Wales is being left behind. No part of Wales is being denied its share of the vaccine. And as it happens, today, the part of Wales that has carried out the most vaccinations of all is the Betty Cadwaladr University Health Board, and I know the member will welcome that.
Question 4, Joyce Watson.
What discussion has the Welsh Government had with the UK Government ministers regarding plans to cut universal credit from April?
Well, I thank Joyce Watson for that very important question. We have and we will continue to lobby the UK Government to maintain the additional £20 universal credit weekly payments and to announce this without delay. If they do not, many households in Wales, 300,000 of them, will lose over £1,000 annually. This uncertainty is causing untold levels of anxiety for some of our most vulnerable families.
First Minister, I thank you for that answer. And the figures are indeed, as you've just said, staggering with the numbers of people who would be subjected to this decrease in what is, we know, the very basic income that they need to exist. I assume, of course, that the UK Government did predicate this change on some evidence that people needed an additional £20 per week just to survive. What interests me now is what evidence they might have provided to inform them that those people can now survive on £20 less from next April. I haven't seen the evidence. I just wonder, First Minister, whether you've seen the evidence that I haven't. We know that this is an extremely stressful time for all families in all areas of the UK. It does seem rather inhumane to me to keep that pressure on those families who are struggling in all sorts of ways, and the uncertainty that it is giving them to, in just 8 weeks, that they might have their funds cut even further, and the choices that they're having to make on a daily basis being placed upon them. So could I ask you, First Minister, when you next speak to your counterparts in the Westminster Government, could you ask them to provide the evidence that they seem to have to reduce this very basic of incomes for the families most in need?
Well, so I'm very happy to do just that. In November, the Chancellor said that he will be making a determination of this matter early in the new year. On the 8th of January, we finally got a reply to a letter that the Finance Minister here had written with counterparts in the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive back in November, saying that the Chancellor was going to wait for more evidence before making up his mind. Well, what evidence does he need, Llywyd? Presumably the £20 a week was a recognition of 4 years of freezing benefits to people of working age, the abolition of the family element of tax credits and universal credits. And if they need further evidence, Llywyd, I'm happy to provide it myself. I'll just for one moment tell you that my office staff, my constituency office staff, as well as having spent the run up to Christmas having to give out food bank vouchers on a scale we'd never seen before, on Christmas Eve, we were contacted by a family, a single parent family with 5 children who literally had nothing in the house at all with which to feed those children over the Christmas period. And my office, like all of yours, people are working from home and they are having to do the very best they can in those circumstances. And they spent Christmas Eve running around trying to make sure that those 5 children had something to eat over Christmas. And in the end, a fantastic local business provided them with the food they needed, and we managed to get it to them. But I cannot tell you how angry it makes me that in the 21st century, we have a system that leaves children here in Wales in that position. They were in that position not by accident. They were in that position because the family cap policy of this government had left that family in that circumstances. A cruel policy that shifts onto children the consequences of parents' behaviour. I'm very happy to provide that evidence to UK ministers when next I have an opportunity, and to say to them, those families need to know now that they are not going to be asked to manage with £1,000 less after the end of March of this year.
Mark Isherwood.
Yeah, Clive. Well, the UK government actually boosted the welfare system by £7.4 billion in 2021, including the temporary £20 a week uplift in universal credit standard allowance and working tax credit basic element. In common with the Welsh Government, the UK government is keeping all of its coronavirus measures under review as the pandemic position changes. As the Prime Minister reconfirmed last week, extending the universal credit uplift beyond April is being kept under review. And the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has stated, as the UK government has done throughout this crisis, it will continue to assess how best to support low-income families, which is why we will look at the economic and health context in the new year. It therefore doesn't have plans to cut universal credit from April. However, given your devolved responsibilities, how do you respond to the calls by the Bevan Foundation, Citizens Advice Cymru and Community Housing Cymru for the Welsh Government to establish a single point of access for benefits and support schemes administered in Wales?
Well, I would remember attempts to be an apologist for the UK government in this regard. It does him no good at all. Keeping it under review is no good to those families in my constituency who rely on that £20 every week to put food on the table for their children. They don't need a review, Mr. Isherwood. They need to know that the money is coming to them. Alan Davis asked me a question earlier, Llywyd, about the nonsense that Conservative politicians are putting around about the £1 billion that the Welsh Government is said to have, and which we will use during the rest of this financial year. The Treasury has £25 billion in its coronavirus reserve. Why don't they make their minds up and tell those families who rely on it that that money is coming to them? That's what I'd like to see.
Helen Mary Jones.
Diolch, Llywyd. And while I share some of the obvious genuine anger that the First Minister feels about the way in which the benefits system affects people here in Wales, I'd like to put it to the First Minister, there is something that he could do for some of those families. It's estimated by the Child Poverty Action Group that there are about 70,000 children in Wales whose families are in receipt of universal credit, and yet they are not eligible for free school meals in Wales. Can I ask the First Minister today, should the UK government make the decision to remove the £20 uplift, and like the First Minister, I very much hope that they don't do that and that they provide families with certainty. But if they do that, does the First Minister accept that there is, of course, something that the Welsh Government could do for those families within its devolved powers, and that is to provide those children and those families with entitlement to free school meals?
Well, so I thank Kerry Mary Jones for that question. Of course, it's an important one, and she will know that the Welsh Government has led the way in making sure the free school meals are available to current beneficiaries through school holidays, not now just until the end of 2020, but through the whole of 2021. The policy that the member advocates is one that would have to be looked at very carefully. I'll give her the costings of it. If we assume that those 70,000 families had one child each, then that would cost us £33 million. If we assume that they had 2 children each, it would cost us £67 million. And if we thought that they had on average 3 children each, it would cost us £101 million. That is very serious money indeed in the circumstances we find ourselves in, and that money would have to be found from somewhere else, because there is no money sitting around in the Welsh Government doing nothing. So I think there's a case to be made. Of course there is, and I've seen it made by the Child Poverty Action Group and others, but I just have to put it to the member that it is not a choice between doing that and letting everything else carry on. It is a choice between doing that and stopping something else, which is undoubtedly necessary and important to many other Welsh citizens.
Question 5, Jane Bryant.
Diolch, Llywydd. What steps is the Welsh Government taking to tackle racism in sport?
Llywydd, racism in any form has no place in Wales, direct or indirect. A great deal of ground still has to be made up at all levels before sport in Wales fully reflects and celebrates the diversity of our nation.
Thank you, First Minister. Over the Christmas period, Dragons rugby winger Ashton Hewitt was subjected to racial abuse on social media. Sadly, this is not an isolated event, and it was only one in a long line of posts that Ashton has received because he's a black player. It's not just confined to one person or sport. Last year, Ashton used his platform to call out racial abuse and raise awareness of racism. Ashton has praised the support he's had from his club, the Dragons, and the Welsh Rugby Players Association, but he has said, it was just important for me to highlight that it does happen in my sport. It's not perfect, and it's important that people acknowledge and take action. Much of the abuse on social media comes from anonymous accounts. While Ashton has said he would like to have a constructive conversation with the person who racially abused him, social media anonymity is a problem with obvious solutions. Many apps and advertising requires proof of identification to create an account. Similar checks could easily be made on social media platforms. Will the First Minister join me in commending Ashton Hewitt for speaking out about racism in sport? Look at how we can support him and others to put an end to all racism. And will the First Minister use his voice in urging the social media giants to strengthen their regulations around anonymous accounts so that there's nowhere for people to hide?
So I thank Jane Bryant for that, and of course I'm very keen to join her in commending the way in which Mr Hewitt responded to the dreadful abuse that he received. I thought his response was remarkable, really. It was dignified and it was designed to try to put right the wrongs that had been carried out. So I absolutely commend him for that. The general point that Jane Bryant makes is a really important one. As I understand it, the account of the person who abused Mr Hewitt has now been cancelled. But we've seen, not just in this incident, but surely we saw across the Atlantic in the United States recently, the harm that is done when people who abuse social media platforms go unchallenged. And I think maybe in some ways we are all a bit inclined to dismiss that stuff as somehow just belonging to a fringe element, and we shouldn't get too worked up about it all. But I think the events that we saw in the United States demonstrate just how insidious that far-right occupation of social media has become. And it's here in Wales as well. It spreads the myths about coronavirus. It encourages people to believe that people who are providing public services to assist them are somehow never to be trusted and always to be suspected. And I think there is more, definitely more, that the platforms themselves need to do to challenge disinformation, to challenge people who seek to pursue their pernicious views in ways that the internet, which in other ways is such a blessing and a boon, the way it has opened up a space for people who wish to use it for entirely illegitimate and destructive purposes. And I agree with what the member said about the need to urge them to do more to make sure that that does not happen.
Laura Jones.
Thank you, Clywes. Happy New Year, First Minister. The Black Lives Matter protests and incidents like that just raised by Jane Bryant have encouraged governments at all levels now to look at the inequalities facing BAME people in all aspects of life, and sport has had a particularly high profile due to sportsmen like Sir Lewis Hamilton and all the Premiership football teams still taking the knee. Campaigners have made the point, though, that nothing will change unless there's greater representation of BAME people in higher echelons of sporting organisations. In football, for example, a quarter of Premier League football players are black. However, there are only 6 managers of BAME background in the professional game and just 1 director of football. In 2003, in the NFL in America, they brought in the Rooney Rule to address the underrepresentation of the African-American coaches in American football, by which at least 1 black candidate is on the shortlist for interview when a manager's job becomes vacant. What discussions has the Welsh Government had with sports councils, sports organisations, clubs and national governing bodies to review representation and pathways for black, Asian and minority ethnic people in Wales?
Well, so thank Laura Ann Johnson for her New Year greeting, but also for shining a light on this really important area and for some of the ideas that she has explored. We are absolutely not immune from this difficulty here in Wales. There are no black people on any of the 17 sporting boards that were recently investigated, and that includes the Welsh Rugby Union, the Football Association of Wales. 9 out of 17 Welsh sports organisations have no BAME staff members. 10 out of 17 Welsh sports organisations have no BAME board members. These are not acceptable figures. So they're absolutely not. And the Rooney Rule is one of the ways in which some of that can be addressed. Now, I do want to say that Sports Wales is very actively trying to address this itself. Our Tell Your Story and Our Stories Matter campaigns are both designed to make sure that the experience of black people in sport in Wales is properly understood, recognised, but that needs to be true of the very top of the sporting world as well. And at board level, we need to see the experience of black sportsmen and women properly represented. The Welsh Government is committed to that. Our Race Equality Action Plan will help us with that. And there are other ways, Llywydd, as well. The audit of commemoration in Wales, which we instituted earlier in the autumn, identified that number of black rugby league players who were forced to leave Wales because of discrimination in the union code. It is remarkable to me that Billy Boston, who I believe is still alive, has a statue to him in Wigan and a statue to him in Wembley, but no statue to him at all here in Wales. And I commend the actions that Cardiff Council is taking to try to put that right. So I thank the member for raising the points that she did, because they are very important, and there is a really serious agenda that sport in Wales is grappling with and needs to make proper progress in resolving.
Question 6, Angela Burns.
Diolch, Llywelyn. Well, good afternoon, First Minister. Will you provide an update on the COVID-19 vaccine rollout strategy?
Thank Angela Burns for that question. So plans for the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine have been made and are now being activated. And these plans will run alongside the existing arrangements for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, of which we continue to receive supplies.
Thank you for that. The first thing I have to say is the vaccinations are a light in a very, very dark tunnel. And I'm deeply grateful, as I know millions of us are, to those amazing scientists who've come up with the vaccinations or the vaccine programs of all different countries in such a short space of time. And it's so important to get that vaccine rollout into the community, because we all know that by tackling the community, then we can start to drive down this terrible coronavirus. So I just want to pose 2 questions to you where I've come across barriers or things that could be potential barriers to the rollout of that vaccine in our community, because I think that time is of the essence and it's very important that you and everyone else is really aware of this. The first is I've had GPs in Pembrokeshire come to me deeply concerned because district nurses have been told that in order to be able to vaccinate, they need to undertake basic life support training. And it just strikes me, first of all, that district nurses of all of us will understand and know basic life support. It's a function of being a frontline healthcare worker. Secondly, they vaccinate every single day, you know, flus and all sorts of things. And I did hear your answer to Paul Davies, and I do understand that some of the vaccinations do have side effects, and we have to be really well aware of things like anaphylactic shock, etc. But I wondered if you'll have a look at this and see if that and those other barriers that are stopping people who are trained professionals who are already in the health service from being able to be part of the vaccination programme, because I think it is key that we get as many people out there vaccinating as possible. And the second part is, I wonder if you are aware or can explain why health boards and, to my understanding, Public Health Wales chose not to go down the route of becoming getting a wholesale distribution licence for the vaccine, so that they could then buy and sell it on, transfer it straight to the general practices, which would help again with the speedy deployment of the vaccine in the community, instead of the GPs having to go through quite an arcane ordering process, setting up new rules and regulations. Both of these have been queries that have been raised with me, and I'd be very grateful for your view on them, either now or in a subsequent letter.
Well, so it's thank Angela Burns for that. And of course, I look properly into the questions that she's raised, and if there's more to add, I'll write to her with it. I think she probably answered her first question herself. All new vaccines bring with them new risks. And even if you're a really experienced vaccinator in other contexts, it is just right that you are trained to make sure that you are aware of the risks that may be there and that you're equipped to respond to them. And now I want that to be done in the easiest way possible and the quickest way possible. And I certainly don't want to have people who are well equipped already having to go over things that they already know. But with a new vaccine and a new virus, and this time last year, we'd hardly heard of the virus, let alone of the vaccine to it. And making sure that the people we ask to do these really important jobs are as equipped as they need to be, I think is important, and a bit of investment in that in the early stage will pay off hugely over the run ahead. In relation to the ordering process, I think it is simply there in order to ensure fairness. We have only 22,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine last week. We've only 25,000 doses of it this week. If we simply allowed GPs to be in a free-for-all for ordering it, there might not be any vaccine in Pembrokeshire at all, because it would be collared by GPs who just got quicker on the line and got it elsewhere. So our ordering process is designed to make sure that there is vaccine available in every part of Wales. And as we bring them on stream to every practice, we're hoping that there'll be 34 practices in Hywel Dda, for example, every practice in the member's own constituency, with vaccine to use by the week of the 24th of January, and having an ordering process that allows us to make sure that the limited supply we have is fairly available in all parts of Wales, is what lies behind the system that we have. If there is more to it than that, I'll make sure that I write to the member with a further explanation.
Question 7, Dawn Bowden.
Finally, question 7, Dawn Bowden.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister provide an update on recent discussions with the UK Government regarding additional funding for Wales?
So despite our repeated calls, the UK Government continues to make funding announcements at the 11th hour without any engagement with the devolved governments and without any immediate clarity on implications for Wales. Confusion surrounding last week's announcement on business support is only the latest example.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. And last week, I was very pleased to read on the Welsh Conservative social media accounts that the UK Government was providing £220 million of, and I quote, extra funding to support jobs and businesses in Wales. That would certainly be very welcome and much needed at this time, especially in areas like my constituency of Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney. The announcement was also described by the Welsh Conservatives economy spokesman, Russell George, as, and again I quote, an additional 227 million. Then the UK Treasury embarrassingly corrected its own press notice after wrongly claiming that the Chancellor's announcement meant extra or additional money for Wales. I recall that last July, the Institute for Fiscal Studies warned that the whole lack of transparency in Treasury budgets was contributing to the confusion about the financial support being given to devolved governments, making it more difficult to scrutinise, and saying that this was corrosive to public trust. Now, First Minister, I got my calculator out, and that tells me that 227 million multiplied by nil equals nil. So is my calculator wrong? Or have we in fact been told one of the most misleading and dishonest statements ever told by the Welsh Tories? And does this not prove that the UK Government should follow the Welsh Government's more transparent approach?
Well, sorry, I'm afraid that the member's calculator is accurate. And she's right, of course, she set out the history of it. The Treasury made an announcement, I heard it myself on the radio, that there was an extra £227 million coming to Wales. That was, I thought, very good news. We would have been able to use it to top up the most generous package of support for businesses anywhere in the United Kingdom. And then it turned out a few hours later that no, this wasn't extra money at all. We'd apparently had it already. Well, you know, that really isn't the way to conduct business across the UK nations. The Welsh Government will lay a further supplementary budget, which we'll put in front of the Senedd early in February. This will be the third time that Senedd members have had a chance to see how the Welsh Government is using the money that is available to us in this extraordinary financial year. Finance Committee will be able to consider it. Questions will be asked on the floor of the Senedd, and all the figures will be there for all members to see. The UK Government has not published a single supplementary estimate in the whole of this financial year. And I think the member makes a very good point about the importance of being clear with people where the money is coming from, what it's being used for. We try and do that here in the Welsh Government, and we would have been helped, particularly over the issue that Dawn Bowden has referred to, where if there had been some greater accuracy and transparency in the way the UK Government described the money, which in the end did not come at all to Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. The next item is questions to the Counsel General and Minister for European Transition in respect of his law officer responsibilities. And the first question is from Andy Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd.